Hello everyone, welcome to this video on range of sentence types and lengths. This video will be about making your writing more interesting. First things first, in this video you're going to learn how you can use a range of sentence types in your writing. You're also going to be able to identify when to use different sentence lengths to achieve effects. So remember, when we're talking about this, we want to create a variety in our writing because that's what's going to make it more interesting. Too much of one thing is boring. So that's what we want to avoid. And that's not just true in terms of sentence types, but it's also true in terms of word classes, in terms of vocabulary, in terms of paragraphing as well. We want to have a variety. There's a famous quote in life that says, variety is the spice of life. And it's really, really true because when one thing happens too much, it gets very, very boring. So having a range of sentence types in your writing is going to make it more engaging and more interesting for the reader. So I've broken this down to three different levels that you have to go through in order to master it. And I would suggest you start off with number one, which is at the bottom here. You want to start with this one and master each one to work your way up to number three. Because number three is a bit more challenging, but you can only really achieve that if you're able to do one and two first. So number one involves writing in different sentence types. So you have to be able to know what each sentence type is and be fairly confident in writing in this sentence type. You also have to be able to identify the different sentence types as well in a piece of in a text, say, where you want to be able to know which sentence type is which. It's going to really, really help you because if you can spot it, then you can actually use it then in your own writing. Number two is about using a range of sentence types in a piece of writing. So this goes beyond just recognizing them and being able to write them, but in a complete piece of writing, you're able to use a range of all the different sentence types. So going back to what we were saying in the previous slide about a variety, you want to be able to have a variety in your writing where you're using all different sentence types, not just mainly one or two of them. And then finally, number three at the top here is being able to use a range of sentence types and lengths for an effect. So understanding that there's just as language we use for an effect and different word classes and vocabulary we can use for an effect, we can also use different sentence types and lengths for an effect as well. And we want to do this intentionally and on purpose. And really, that's the stage where we are trying to reach, where we are in control of our writing, we are crafting a piece of writing for an effect and an impact on the reader. In other words, we're not leaving it up to chance and by anything by accident. We want to be doing things purposefully in our writing. Okay, so to start off then, so we want to be able to identify and be able to write in these different sentence types. And what are these different sentence types? Well, we have a simple sentence here. We can start off by saying something like, I like chocolate. Now, a simple sentence is simple not because of the language necessarily, but it's simple because it has a subject and a verb. And it tends to not have any of the connectives, any connectives in there or joining words. So it's fairly short sometimes, these sentences. They don't have to be, but they're sometimes quite short. Next type of sentence we have is a compound sentence. So this is when we join two simple sentences together using a connective. So here we've got, I like chocolate, but I wouldn't eat it every day. And this connective but joins the two sentences together and otherwise would stand on their own. So we have one sentence here that says, I like chocolate, and another sentence here that says, I wouldn't eat it every day. And I've connected them using the but. Something to note as well, that I could replace this connective here with a semicolon, and that would also work. Third, we are moving on to complex sentences. So a complex sentence here sounds something a bit like this. Although I like chocolate, I wouldn't eat it every day. And the main difference between a complex sentence and a compound sentence is the connectives that we're using and the structure of the sentence that we're creating because of that. So for example, here, if I get rid of the but, I have two sentences that could stand on their own and they would make sense. So a sentence is always a complete idea, remember that. A complex sentence here, there's two parts to this sentence. There's one part that says, although I like chocolate, and there's another part that says, I wouldn't eat it every day. Now, the first part of this sentence needs the other part in order to make sense. So imagine having a conversation with someone and them saying something like, although I like chocolate, and then they just stop talking. Your next response would be, and so what? Because it's not a complete idea. However, if someone said, I wouldn't eat chocolate every day, that would be a complete idea, and therefore that could stand on its own and make sense. So a complex sentence is one that one part needs the other part to make sense. So one's dependent and one's independent. Okay, and the types of word classes, the types of connectives that are used in this sentence are different to the ones that's used in this, and I'll come on to that later. We've got a compound complex sentence for the fourth one here, and this tends to be a very long sentence because it's a combination of a compound sentence and a complex sentence. And a way to create this the easier way to create it is to begin with the compound part first. So I've just got my compound sentence in there. I've got, I like chocolate, but I wouldn't eat it every day. Now, instead of putting a full stop there, I'm going to put a comma and I'm going to attach another connective that I normally would use to create a complex sentence. So I'm going to say something like, I like chocolate, but I wouldn't eat it every day, although I am tempted to sometimes. Now, this part needs, like we were saying before, needs something else to make sense, and that's what makes it complex. But it works because it's got that other part, which is the compound sentence. So it's, in short, compound complex is a combination of compound and complex put together. Finally, over here I wanted to add in minor sentences, and these are sentences that are usually very, very short, usually like one word, a one-worded sentence. And the difference between a minor sentence and a simple sentence is that it doesn't have a verb and a subject. It sort of breaks those rules. So here we might have single words such as yes, always, never. It can be absolutely anything, and this usually can achieve a real impact to the reader because it makes that sentence stand out. A good way to think about writing these and to practice writing these is to do a piece of writing and try to use all the different sentence types on this slide and to sort of highlight what they're about. Okay, that's a really good way to practice them and highlight which ones you've used, in other words. So highlight where you've used a simple, a compound, or a complex, and so forth. Moving on then. So it's about using a range of sentence types and lengths in a piece of writing. So here we want to go beyond just writing them. We want to actually have an impact on the reader by creating a variety in your writing. And you can do that by using a range. So going back to variety is key. Now, another thing to note is we don't want to use any patterns unless for an effect. So in other words, we shouldn't have a pattern of simple sentences or compound sentences or complex sentences in a row unless it's for an effect. And I'll come on to effect in a little bit, but keep that in mind. You want to always mix it up and have different sentence types all mixed sort of in together. Using a range to interest the reader. Always focus on that. Always try to use a range to interest the reader. Never have one sentence type after the other. And my advice for you is also, when you're doing this, is also to have in each paragraph, try to have at least 2 short sentences in there. And a short sentence I define as 1 to 5 words. Okay, 1 to 5 words. So it could be a minor sentence or a simple sentence. That's usually the gist or the general sentence types that you're going to be using when you're writing short sentences. And finally, the big one here is to use a range of sentence types and lengths for an effect. So just keep in mind that when we are using language, we choose certain words because they have a certain effect on the reader. But here, we want to select different sentence types and sentence lengths to use so that it has an effect on the reader. So we've got short sentences generally and long sentences. So short sentences tend to suggest panic or anxiety. So that's really useful in terms of question 5 of the creative writing part of paper 1, where a character might be feeling anxious in a moment, or in a panic, or in stress, or they might be feeling afraid. And we might want to convey this through the sentence lengths we've chosen. Conversely, on paper 2, we have question 5, which is a non-fiction question. And you might want to use short sentences here because they're punchy and they're to the point. They can really impact the reader. If you have a long sentence followed by one of these short sentences, it really, really makes an impact on the reader. So here's some examples you could use for the suggesting a panic or anxiety. So something like this. I started to sweat. My hands trembled. My heart began beating faster. I ran. As you can see, I've used a series of short sentences here to make an impact on the reader, to suggest that the character is feeling panic and is panicking and is feeling anxious. Because when people feel anxious, they tend to speak in very short sentences. They don't tend to ramble on because they don't feel that. It doesn't make sense with how they're feeling. It's very quick, it's very in the moment. So you want to understand that and be able to reflect that in your sentence types and lengths. And then conversely, we've got long sentences here. So long sentences tend to suggest something that's very tiresome, tedious, or boring. So it can also suggest something that's taken an extensive amount of time as well. I've got an example here to show you. So imagine that this is describing, what a character does pretty much every single day. It'll go something like this. I wake up and I brush my teeth, put on my clothes, eat breakfast quickly, go to work, then come home, make dinner, and go to bed and do everything again, over and over and over. Now, this really long sentence suggests that this character's life is very, very tiresome, and it's very much a routine, and it's very tedious and boring as well, because it just, the sentence is so long. There's a lot happening in the sentence. There's a lot to read, and we could make this even longer, this sentence as well. Now, I would only do this once, perhaps here in a piece of writing, to really show and to mirror that feeling that the character's feeling, which is that this is very boring. This has taken a very, very long time. So notice how I've done this. I've created a list, separated them with commas, and I've also used a bit of repetition here. Lots of overs, lots of ands as well is another good way to make something seem that's very extensive, that something's taking a long, long time. And my advice for you to achieve this in your writing overall is to create opportunities to create this in your writing. So remember, you can write about anything really that you want, as long as it links to the question, as long as it links to the image. And in that freedom, you should look for and create opportunities to write using these sentence types to create these effects on the reader. If you combine all three of these, using a range for variety, using a range in every paragraph and in a whole piece of writing, and then using a range of lengths and types for an effect as well, you're going to create, just based on that sentence types and lengths alone, you're going to create a more engaging piece of writing.